These are WISC scores. And the WISC, if you're not familiar with this, it's a cognitive measure that is given in a battery of tests or assessments that might be included in a psychoeducational evaluation or a neuropsychological evaluation. So many of you may have had your children assessed previously, and you may have scores that look somewhat like this. So I just want to quickly go through and spend time talking about processing speed. So in terms of this WISC profile, you may notice that I only have subtest scores. That's purposeful. I really use the subtest scores more than any other scores because the other scores are averages for that index or average for the section. And I'm looking at the score that's most closely tied to the subtest so I can see what we're actually measuring. So knowing what these subtests ask students to do is really helpful because then we know what the scores will mean. So the first index, you may notice that there are a lot of scores in the teens. So the scores range from 14, 15, 15, and 17. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but I'll say that these subtest scores are all in the superior range. So we can say that verbal ability for the student is quite superior. So that means that verbal skills come very easily to this child. In the next section, there's visual spatial ability, and you'll notice two very solid scores, 14 and 14. So this means that the student's ability to visually look at changes in nonverbal designs and being able to pick from an array of what might come next is as strong as the verbal section, but it doesn't have the same high scores like 15s and 17s. So it may be a comparatively weaker section. Then you look at fluid reasoning. Again, I'm just going to go over this really quickly. So that's a combination of language ability as well as visual spatial ability. And you see that this student is able to get back the higher scores, 15 and 16, get back out in that higher superior range because the student probably can talk his or her way through the tasks that are being presented while they're looking. Working memory, just average. The 12s are on the cusp of the average range. It's high average, but not quite in the superior range. So you may be getting a sense of this child's profile. And now we're going to look at processing speed, and you'll see these two numbers, 1 and a 5. Maybe numbers like this are familiar to you. So this might look like this student doesn't really have processing speed skills. So let's just talk about what these two subtests ask. So these are two, coding and symbol search are what give assessors an idea of a student's processing speed ability. So these are both timed tests, they're both paper and pencil tests, and they ask students to do some visual scanning where they have to look quickly at small figures and then cross them out or not cross them out. So they're given a certain menu and the kids have to cross them off. And it's really tied to kids moving quickly. So they're looking at a motor response to what's seen, which is visual spatial. So what kinds of tasks are like that in school? You know, none, except for maybe Mad Minute, which is like a quick math facts fluency type test. So most learning isn't like this, but it gives us a very nice sense of a student's processing speed where we can kind of separate it out from verbal, visual spatial, fluid reasoning, and working memory. Now, some students might have low scores in more than just one index, but I was proving a point in this presentation by really kind of making this child's sample profile very clean so we can just talk about processing speed. But in real life, processing speed is related to so many other things, which we'll talk about in a moment. So let's extrapolate what this might mean for a student. So this might mean for a student that worksheets at school are going to be a problem. And for 2E students who have superior verbal comprehension ability, they have so many ideas in their minds. And when they get a worksheet or they get a project, they really have to decipher which of those ideas they want to identify on their worksheet. So that means they kind of have to sift through all the ideas that they're thinking of. And that process of sifting takes time, and many children enjoy thinking about their thinking because they've got superior fluid reasoning ability. But in the meantime, the rest of the class is just simply filling out the worksheet or simply following the steps of the project. And a student with this kind of a profile might really struggle. And then when the time is up and the classroom is ready to move on to another activity, or the teacher's collecting the pages, or they could be online pages as well, but when the time period is over for that assignment, this student then has to beat the clock and just finish it up. So what do we typically see? We typically see the minimum of a written answer, or a blank space, or we see writing that isn't very legible, or we hear from the student a lot of reasons why the task isn't important, or why it's boring, or um, why they don't want to do it. So it becomes more of an emotional and kind of behavioral issue than just the straight processing speed. But I wanted to just show you what this looks like, because when I see low scores like this, I think when I speak with parents, I think that their child has really spent a lot of time building up the confidence to handle written expression, and yet also having to really handle their feelings about written expression, given the timeline that they're asked to complete things. So guess what? My understanding is that most students think of themselves as a learner not based on their cognitive scores that are superior in verbal ability, not on their visual spatial abilities, not on fluid reasoning, certainly not on working memory, but on processing speed. So unfortunately, some children think of themselves as learners based on how quickly and how well they write the responses to the things that they're learning in school, whether it's a worksheet or an essay, etc. So we'll be talking more about writing tasks, but I just wanted to kind of bring up the idea that we really need to look at where students are connected to their strengths and where they are interested in showing what they've learned or what they know, and not make all of learning about the product. That we really need to assist students who have superior skills to know how to handle an assignment where the processing speed skills might be an issue. And I'm going to be leaving the sample profile, but the takeaway from this slide is that I think that many kids think of themselves as learners based on their processing speed ability, which couldn't be farther from the truth.